Okay, so we're on, we're ready to go. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to start our class today. I'm going to ask everybody to mute themselves so we're not going to have any issues of sound. And as you can see, today's class, we're going to discuss a very interesting, well, I don't know if she's interesting, but it's a lady, but the story, the way at least I look at that and what, what kind of gave me the inspiration, I think is a very, very interesting story. That's the story of, we're going to try to learn something from the story of the wife of Jonah, the prophet. So before jumping into that, today's class is sponsored by Michelle Dolgin, who is with us in honor of the yahrzeit today. As far as I understand, the yahrzeit of her grandmother, Anna Yablong, Chana Rezel Bat Hillel Dov. And Michelle wants us to share with us just a little bit. She was born in, Mrs. Yablong was born in Poland, eldest of 8 children. And this was a very close family, and Michelle tells us that she impacted her life in many wonderful ways. She was wise, strong, respected woman with knowledge and love for Judaism and the traditions, and those traditions were passed down to her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. And she was the matriarch of the family, and family was everything to her. And she was everything to them. She was an amazing cook and baker, and she made holidays and Shabbat special in so many ways.
Hi, Arile.
And she helped those around her and offered wisdom into all areas of life through her knowledge and love of Torah and her incredible insight. May her memory continue to live on, and may her neshama have an aliyah. Amen.
Oh, yes.
So I'm going to ask again, if you haven't had the chance to mute yourself, to do so. And as I mentioned before, we're going to discuss the wife of Jonah. So let me stop the share here for a second, just for the benefit of those who forgot the story of Jonah. So first of all, we read the story of Jonah, the book of Jonah, on. Let me try to do something here and people from here. Yeah, I can do that. That's going to be better. So just give me a second. I think everybody is muted, almost. Okay, now we're not going to have any sound issues. The story of Jonah, we read it on Yom Kippur at Mincha, right? That's the maftir, that's the haftarah of Mincha on Yom Kippur. But here's the story just to refresh our memories. The prophet Yonah ben Amittai, the son of Amittai, is commanded by God to give a prophecy for the people of Nineveh. Okay? And the prophecy is, either you're going to correct your ways, you're going to do tshuva, or otherwise, v'ninveh necheravet. Right? There's going to be a destruction. You've done something bad, things are bad, therefore, God is giving you a last chance to correct your ways, otherwise, this place is doomed. Yonah is trying to run away to a different city in order to avoid his task. Why? It's a long story. That's not really our discussion today. And part of the journey, he goes into the sea. He's on a boat. There's a storm. and the sailors are fighting with, in the storm. And at some point they realize there's something going on here, and they have a kind of a lottery to see, whose fault is this that there's this storm. And of course, they realize it's Jonah. They start to ask him all sorts of a question and whatever, where is it coming from, where is it going, why, all that kind of stuff. And he tells them that he is Jewish, and he's running away from God. And this is why this is happening. And he tells them, throw me into the water and everything will be fine. And they said, just do that. Before that, they ask for forgiveness, and they have some sort of a prayer, and they said, Al na novda b'nefesh ha'ish hazeh. God, don't hold it against us that we are going to throw this man into the water. Ve'al titen aleinu dam naki. We're not murderers. Ki ata Hashem ka'asher chafatzta asita. It is your will. There's nothing we can do. We have to save ourselves. They throw him into the water, and in the water, what happens? He is being swallowed by a big fish, okay, whether it's a whale or whatever. He stays inside that fish for 3 days and 3 nights. And during that time, Jonah approaches God in prayer. And yes, he basically makes a deal with God, and he says, listen, I'm gonna go on with the task. Just save me from this fish. God forgave Jonah, and he is out of the fish. And then God tells him, okay, it's time to go back to Nineveh and tell them the prophecy. Okay, I'm going to stop the story here for a second. The prophet Jonah is mentioned in the Bible one more time. It's in the book of Melachim Bet. And there's a machloket about whether there's a connection between those 2 prophecies, the one in Sefer Melachim and the one that we see in Sefer Yonah when it comes to Nineveh. One opinion says it's the same prophet, and so he is prophesying about the kingdom of Israel in the times of Yerovam, and therefore he's commanded to go to Nineveh. Others claim that the book of Yonah is actually a much later creation. It was actually written in the times of the Second Temple, using this character of Jonah from the book of Kings in order to create some sort of a more credibility for the story. And therefore they chose a prophet for which we don't have a lot of information. Okay, either way, that's not that important at this point. Let's go back to the story. So we said that Jonah was inside the fish for 3 days. Then he is out, and that particular story, Jonah is being inside the fish for 3 days, created a huge machloket, a huge debate among the Parshanim, the commentators. Most of them said, yes, this happened in reality. And others, like Rabbi Yosef Kaspi, that he gives the Yesh Omrim, there's another opinion, etc., saying that this didn't happen, and that was only a vision. There was only a vision part of the prophecy. Okay, either way, everybody agrees that the story of Yonah to some extent happened among the traditional commentators, at least. But to what extent, whether the story with the fish happened or not, this is something that is debatable even among what we call the traditional commentators. Okay, make a long story short, Yonah goes to Nineveh and he gives the prophecy, and he says in 40 days, the city is going to be turned over unless you're going to do tshuva. And the people of Nineveh, together with the king of Nineveh, decided to do tshuva. And they fasted, they davened to Hashem, and God forgave them. And when Yonah hears about them, he asks God to what? To kill him. He said, Tov moti mechayai. Why? Because, and I think we discussed that at some point in the past, Yonah is under the wrong assumption that his prophecy, since his prophecy did not fulfill, his prophecy was, Od 40 yom v'ninveh ne'efachet. In 40 days, God is going to destroy this city. What happened in reality? They achieved atonement. The city was not destroyed. Therefore, he said, now I'm considered to be a false prophet. So there's no point of me being alive. I'm a false prophet. Another explanation is why you're not asked to die is that the people of Nineveh who were not Jewish, they were able to achieve atonement. However, that's going to play bad on the people of Israel. Because if they're going to say, well, if the Goyim were able to make tshuva and they were able to gain forgiveness from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we can't do that, doesn't look good. Doesn't look good. And who is to blame? Jonah. He's the prophet. Anyway, so back to the story. Jonah goes into the desert and he built a hut, he built a sukkah, and God created this kikayon, this bush, this tree, whatever, sort of a bush that grows in the desert, and that bush was giving shade to Jonah. And then God brings a worm that eats up the entire tree, and the tree dies. And again, Jonah asked God to kill him. Tov moti mechayai, and he faints because of the heat. And then God tells him the following, and it says, Ata chasta la kikayon, you had mercy on this kikayon, on this bush. Asher lo amalta bo velo gidalto, you did nothing. You didn't water it, you didn't toil, you didn't put anything into this kikayon, into this bush, and nonetheless, you feel bad about this kikayon, that in one night it's here and then the other day it's gone. And you expect me, God, not to have mercy on Nineveh, the big city of Nineveh, that has more than 12,000 people. Okay, God is trying to teach Yonah a lesson that, you need to have mercy, right? And if you have mercy on this bush, alachat kama v'chama, how much more so that I'm going to have mercy on my creations, on people, especially when they decided to do tshuva, a whole big city. Okay, and the story of Yonah kind of clarifies to us and highlights this as something that is very central on this topic, and then the Rambam talks about it, and many others talk about this idea that what's the difference between a real prophet and a false prophet? The prophecy of a false prophet, the purpose of that prophecy is to be fulfilled. Right? However, when it comes to a true prophet, especially when we talk about destruction, the success of that prophet and the prophecy, if the prophecy is
okay, right, yeah, right.
If the prophecy is not fulfilled. Why? Because people made tshuva. This is how, so, right, if I'm a prophet and I'm going to say to people, you need to do tshuva, otherwise God is going to destroy the temple, God is going to destroy the land, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. Now, by logic, you would say, well, it didn't happen. That means you're a false prophet. And that was the problem, that was the mistake of Jonah. come the rabbis and say, you misunderstand. The fact that people were able to make tshuva, that's the success. That means you had an impact on them. You are not, it's not about that we judge you based on what you said, but rather on your ability to influence. However, when it comes to a false prophet, if the false prophet says, you're going to win the lottery, you're going to win the battle, whatever that is, and this didn't happen, then you know it's a false prophet. Okay, that's the story of Jonah. Let's go back to the slide here. And see, this is the fish throwing out Jonah back, and this is the storm. But who is Jonah? Who is Jonah? So here are the sources that we find, except for other than the book of Jonah, of course. We have the following. As I mentioned before, the prophet Jonah is mentioned in the book of Melachim, and the pasuk says, "Kidvar Hashem, asher haya kidvar Hashem Elohei Yisrael asher diber beyad avdo Yonah ben Amitai hanavi asher migat hachefer." So there's definitely, according to Sefer Melachim, there was this prophet Yonah, son of Amitai, Yonah the prophet, from the place called Gat Hefer. That's the name of the place. And according to the commentaries, Yonah, I'm going to jump here for a second to the third one. According to Midrash, says the following. Tana Dever Rabbi Eliezer, Yonah ben Amitai, the prophet Jonah, you know who that is? Ben Hatzrafit Haya, Shehecheya Eliyahu Hanavi. Yonah ben Amitai is the son of the Tzrafit, the widow from Tzarfat. We discussed that story at length in the past. That was revived by Eliyahu the prophet. And just to put things in context, the story of the widow from Tzarfat is when Kadosh Baruch Hu says to Eliyahu, "Kum lech Tzarfata, go to Tzarfat, asher letzidon." By Tzidon, it's a city in the northern part of Israel, actually southern part of Lebanon, that area. V'yashavta sham, and you're going to be there. Hine tziviti sham isha almana lechalkelecha, and I have made arrangements for this widow to provide food and shelter for you. Okay, let's just to put things in context for those who were not with us last year or year before when we discussed the story of the widow from Tzarfat. I'm just going to put it very quickly. What's the story over there? Eliyahu, Elijah the prophet, lives in a time where there's a lot of idolatry in the land of Israel. The king at the time is King Achav. Achav and his wife is Queen Izebel. She comes from Tzidon. Right? She is actually the princess of Tzidon. She's the daughter of Melech Tzidon. And she brings a lot of avodah zarah, a lot of idolatry into the land of Israel. They have a lot of influence, and that's what happens. And the land is full of avodah zarah. Things are bad from a spiritual perspective, even though in terms of the economy, the borders, all that kind of stuff, things are actually very, very good. Achav is a very powerful king. He's got control of what's going on in the land, and he made some very important peace treaties with the neighbors. Economy is boosting. Everything is actually very good in the land, except from spiritual point of view, where things are really bad. And Eliyahu is the prophet at that time. He gets into a lot of debates with Achav, and at kind of, there are two important famous stories. First is the one that Eliyahu meets Achav after Achav steals the vineyard of Navot HaYisraeli. Okay, one of the bad things that that Achav made, well, among many, but he stole a vineyard from somebody just because he wanted. It was adjacent to his property, and he wanted to do that, right? And Eliyahu, at the heat of that, when he's trying to rebuke him, he decides, or actually declares, there's going to be a drought till further notice. The drought actually ends with another famous story that's 3 years later, that there was a drought for 3 years, and the very famous story, that's the story of Eliyahu on Mount Carmel and the 450 false prophets, the prophets of the Baal. And in this very impressive show of lightning and thunder and the whole thing, and Eliyahu is able to prove that those are false prophets, and he says, Hashem hu Elohim, that's the end of the drought as well. This is kind of the frame of the two stories. So the story beginning is when Achav steals the vineyard of Navot, drought starts, and then it ends 3 years later with, again, Eliyahu in this very impressive story on Mount Carmel, in that challenge with the 450 false prophets. What happens in between? In between, there are 3 little stories that are very, very significant, that seemingly have nothing to do with each other. On the first one, Eliyahu is commanded to live by the creek Nahal Krit, by a certain creek, and he gets his water from the creek, and he gets food from the ravens. That obviously it's a miracle that God sends ravens with food for him. In the second, that's the story relevant to us. Eliyahu, after about a year or so of being over there in the creek by that stream, Eliyahu is commanded to go to Tzarfat and live in the house of that widow, and she's taking care of his food and shelter. And it's a fascinating story by itself. We discussed that. I don't want to go into that too much. That lady, which brings us to the third story, at some point after Eliyahu was there, that lady has a son, and that son dies. And Eliyahu is performing, he needs to perform a miracle to revive that son. Just to put it in context, some modern commentaries suggest that this is the first recorded case of CPR. Because of the description, how Eliyahu is, he puts like his mouth on the mouth of the child, etc., and he revive him. Okay, whatever that is. So these are the 3 stories that seemingly there's no connection between them. One is that Eliyahu is commanded to be by that creek, by that stream. Then he's commanded to go and live in Tzarfat, in the house of that widow. And then the third story, that he is actually reviving her son. Okay? Now, what we learned, I think it was like 2 years ago, is that there's a progression here between the 3 stories. And it's a progression of some sort of a educational process that Eliyahu has to go through to gain sympathy, to understand the difficult times of the people, the Jewish people, because of the drought that he announced. And God is making Eliyahu go through some sort of a educational process so he'll understand better what's going on. Okay? So following the first story of Eliyahu and Achav, where Eliyahu tells Achav, Haratzachta gam yarashta, there's a very famous phrase. He said, not only did you kill this guy, you also took his land, the vineyard. Well, that was like too much for Achav and Izebel to hear, and Izebel decided to kill Eliyahu. This is why Eliyahu had to go and hide in that creek. Right? So anyway, so Eliyahu is running from one place to the other, and Eliyahu is, when he's running away from Achav and Izebel, he ends up at the house of that widow during that time of the drought. There was hunger. Okay. And Chazal, I'm going to go back to our sources here. And Chazal say to us about this story, as I said, who was that child that Eliyahu revived? The son of that Tzrafit, of that widow, Yonah ben Amitai ben Tzrafit haya she'echaya Eliyahu Navi. That was that boy. Okay?
Ah, wow.
So that boy that was revived by Eliyahu is Yonah. Okay, what else do we know about him? So there's a story also in Sefer Melachim Bet, in a different place, that talks about Yehu ben Nimshi, one of the kings of Israel. And the Pasuk says, this is already after the time of Eliyahu. That's, as you remember, Eliyahu is being preceded by his student Elisha. If you're not on mute, I would ask you to mute yourself, please. So Elisha, he is the student of Eliyahu, and he will learn the following. Ve'elisha Navi kara le'achad mibnei hanaviim.
Delivery driver calling on behalf of yes on 22.
And here's what I'm going to do.
We sent you a card with information about where you can drop your ballot off or vote in person. So please, receive your mailbox. If you haven't voted yet, please remember to vote yes on 22.
I'm going to stop the sharing.
You mute us?
I'm trying it. Every time it's like I need to mute somebody else. And so please make sure that you are muted, because we get like all those noises.
Yeah.
Okay. Back to here. So Elisha calls one of sons of the Nevi'im. We don't know who that person is. Okay? I guess it's a young man. Get ready and take this jug of oil. Velech Ramot Gilad, go to Ramot Gilad, Uvata Shama, Ur'eh Sham Yehu ben Yehoshaphat ben Nimshi. Find Yehu, son of Yehoshaphat ben Nimshi. Okay, and take him aside, whatever. I'm going to skip that. Velakachta pach hashemesh ve'atzakta al rosho. What are you going to do? You're going to take this jug of oil and you're going to anoint him. You're going to pour it over his head. That's how you anoint a king. Va'amarta. You tell him, God said, I've anointed you as the king of Israel. Okay? So Elisha, one of his tasks is to anoint Yehu as the king of Israel. How does he do that? He takes one of his students, somebody that, like, one of his groupies that was with him, and he said to him, I'm sending you on that mission. What does Rashi tells us on that spot? Who was that kid? Achad mibnei hanavim. Who that person was? Rashi says, Yonah ben Amitai haya. You know who that kid is? Is Yonah. Chronologically, it makes sense, because if Yonah was a child that Eliyahu revived, then he is a young man at the times of Elisha. Make perfect sense. Okay, now we're going to go into the post-biblical sources that we find about the story of Yonah. The Yalkut Shimoni says the following: Amar Rabbi Yonah, which is funny that Rabbi Yonah comments on Yonah, the prophet. I don't know, whatever. I find that funny. Yonah ben Amittai me'oleh regalim haba. Yonah was one of those people that was very careful to be oleh regel, the pilgrimage, right? On Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, you go to Beit HaMikdash in Eretz Israel. V'nichnas lesimchat Bet HaShoeva. Not only that, he went to Simchat Bet HaShoeva. What's Simchat Bet HaShoeva? Simchat Bet HaShoeva was a huge celebration that was taking place during Sukkot, during Chol HaMoed Sukkot. V'sharta alav Ruach HaKodesh, and he had Ruach HaKodesh, a divine inspiration, while he was there in the celebration of Simchat Bet HaShoeva, lelamedcha, to teach us, she'ein hashchina shora ela alev sameach. If you want to have any inspiration, you want to have a divine inspiration, etc., what do you need to be? In the state of simcha. If you're going to be gloomy, what we call in Yiddish a Tisha B'Av Punim, you're going to have the face of somebody like it's Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, you're not going to merit prophecy. You can't get the Shekhinah. Okay, so that's one thing that we learned. This is going to play a role later on. The Zohar tells us something interesting. Yonah mechela de Eliyahu ka'ate. What does it mean? Yonah had the strength, had the energy from Eliyahu, which makes sense because if Eliyahu is the one who revived him, so in some mystical way, and don't ask me what exactly it means that Yonah had the power or part of the power, spiritual, obviously, not physical, spiritual power, or perhaps even the prophecy, power of prophecy of Elijah. He becomes like the commentaries on the Zohar kind of say that he became, that Jonah became the spiritual pupil of Eliyahu. Okay. We have another statement in Masechet Nedarim that says the following: Kol haneviim ashirim hayu. All the prophets, they were wealthy people. How do we know that? Yonah. Why? Because Yonah himself was wealthy. And we say, if Yonah was wealthy and he was a prophet, so that's a sign that everybody else, all the other prophets, were also wealthy. It's kind of difficult to explain because we know about certain prophets that were very poor, but whatever, at least that's the statement. Okay, Otzar HaMidrashim tells us the following: מרוב חמה שהייתה ליונה במעי הדג נשרפו בגדיו, וכל שערות ראשו, גופו וזקנו. One of the side effects of being inside the fish was that all of his clothes and all of his hair, all like, you know, his beard, his hair on his head, his whatever, his facial hair, his hair all over his body, everything burned, I guess because of the acidity or whatever, but they call it because of the heat inside the fish, whatever that means. Okay. The Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, which is another midrash, tells us that what happens to the sailors, remember those sailors that threw him into the water? So later on, like here's the post story of Book Yonah, so they tell us the following: when those sailors, I guess they had a reunion, or unless Yonah sent them like a WhatsApp or something, or like a short video, you're not gonna believe what happened to me. Right, and kind of share his experiences with them, with his buddies, those sailors. And when they learned what happened to Yonah during all that time and all the miracles that occurred to him, not only, so they went back to Yerushalayim, not only that they, and there's a discussion actually whether they fully converted or they just circumcised themselves. But the important part is what they did is they decided this is not only us that recognizing God as God, because of all the stuff that we heard, but also they brought their wives to learn and to fear God. Okay? And then indeed the Zohar says the following, התגיירו כולם ולמדו תורה והיו חכמים גדולים. They all converted and spent their days in the yeshiva, and they were big scholars. Okay? So that's the stuff that we know about Jonah. Fine. What about the wife of Jonah? What about the wife of Jonah? So let me do this here. Wife of Jonah. Who was she? Interestingly enough, she is not mentioned in the Bible at all. So according to the Bible, we don't even know that Jonah had a wife. But only in the Talmud, in Masechet Eruvin, we see the following statement: Veishto shel Yonah, Jonah's wife, hayta ola laregel. She used to be also ola laregel, pilgrimage. She used to go to Beit HaMikdash. Velo michuba chachamim. Nonetheless, the rabbis did not do nu to her for doing that. What do I mean they didn't do nu to her? It's a mitzvah to go to the Be'olel Regel, to go to the Holy Temple in Yerushalayim. What does it mean? They didn't michu, they didn't protest, meaning the rabbis let her go to Yerushalayim. So here's a possible explanation. What happened at that time? You have to understand, we're talking about the time of the kingdom of the Jewish kingdom is split into two kingdoms, right? It's the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel. Where is the temple? The temple is in the kingdom of Judah. Where is Jonah? He is in the kingdom of Israel. He is from Gat Hefer. Was there, could you go between the two kingdoms? Like, no problems, just like, passport control? What is going on over there? So we learn, not that simple. If you remember Yerovam ben Novat, the first king of Israel, decided to close the borders because he tried to establish the kingdom of Israel as a spiritual center. And therefore, he did like all those things, like the two Eglei Zahav, if you remember the story, he created those two huge golden caps that's supposed to replace the temple in Jerusalem. And he said, this is the new temple. You don't need to go to Jerusalem. Not only that, what happened? What happened? Here it is. פרדסאות שהושיב ירובעם על הדרכים שלא יעלו ישראל לרגל. Meaning, there were guards. Yerovam already, a generation or two before. Guards that Yerovam assigned on the border, making sure people do not cross the border. Why? Because we don't want people to go to Be'oleh Laregel. We don't want them to do it. So that means that the border was closed. Therefore, we might understand why the Chachamim had to protest against that. Because what? That was perhaps something that is dangerous. Not only it was dangerous, if you remember, the pasuk when it comes to Aliyah Laregel says the following: Shalosh pe'amim bashana yera'eh kol zechurcha. That means what? Zechurcha come from the word zachar. Who is obligated to go to Aliyah Laregel, to Yerushalayim? Male. All the men, not the women. So if somebody does that, that perhaps it's noble, maybe it's nice, but when that involves also danger, then it becomes stupid. You don't have the obligation to do that. Not only do you don't have the obligation, you go ahead and do that in times of danger, then the rabbis should say, no, 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 don't do that. Nonetheless, the statement from Eruvin, she used to do it, velo michu b'chachamim. And they did not tell her, don't do that. Okay, here is a little bit of a discussion about this statement from Masechet Eruvin. It says the following: Ve'al ishto shel Yonah, right? We know about with regards to the wife of Yonah. That's what we said, that she used to go to the regel. V'chi ta'aleh al da'atcha sh'aliyat regel asur. Even if you're going to say that it is prohibited. Ve'hachayevet b'simcha. However, there's another mitzvah that we are obligated on the holidays, especially on the holiday of Sukkot, on which the Torah says, "V'samachta b'chagecha v'hayita ach sameach." There's an obligation to be besimcha on the holiday of Sukkot, and there's an obligation to be besimcha actually on all the holidays. And what do we learn about Yonah himself here? Amar Rabbi Yonah, remember that. Yonah ben Amitai moleh regalim ava. He used to be one of those people that perhaps even in spite of the danger, he used to be olela regel. He used to cross the border and go into Yerushalayim to Beit HaMikdash. And not only that, in Simchat Beit HaShoeva, because he was so happy during that time, Besharta alav ruach hakodesh. He had a divine inspiration in that time because he was there in the state of Simcha in Beit HaMikdash in the holiday where it was commanded to be besimcha. So perhaps his wife went with him. It makes sense. Why? Because even though it's dangerous perhaps, and maybe she's not obligated to go to Yerushalayim, she's still obligated in be in the state of simcha. And how will she achieve that simcha? Being in Yerushalayim. And what the Sefer HaYashar continues says, the following: the be'aliyata laregel, when she went to Yerushalayim, hayta mevia olat re'iya belot nai. She used to be a korban. She used to bring a korban, a sacrifice, and without a condition, meaning lindava, because of the generosity of her heart. Belo beracha hayta. Sefer HaYashar trying to explain how that's possible, and he said, you know what? And she did that, and it was kind of the wrong thing to do. Therefore, there was no bracha in that. Yes, she did that. And maybe it was noble. Maybe she thought she was really cool for doing that, but it didn't have bracha. This is why I put this picture here of the whole family, the wife and the husband. They go to Yerushalayim with a lot of simcha. Okay. So she did that even though she's not obligated because the pasuk says only the male are obligated. Nonetheless, she received sachar, she received reward, because perhaps she wanted to be with her husband. By the way, rings a bell, right? Because they remembered another story of another woman that used to go together with her husband to Yerushalayim. Actually, I don't know if it was Yerushalayim, it was to the Mishkan, it was to the tabernacle, because the Mikdash was not built yet. That's Chana. That's the mother of Shmuel. She used to go with her husband Elkanah. She used to go to Shiloh, to the tabernacle. This is right, and every time, and she was depressed, and she prayed to God, and God granted her a son eventually. That was Shmuel. So maybe in the case of Jonah, his wife went with him. It was a family trip. He said, I'm going. And she said, you know what? I'm going with you. even though I'm not obligated. Right? Okay. Let's go back to here. In any event, oh, by the way, another idea, remember that statement from Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, that the sailors, what did they do? ונדרו להביא איש את אשתו ליראת אלוקי יונה. The sailors brought their wives to Jerusalem. You know what? Maybe it was like a whole happening for all the wives got together and they had like parties. The men used to stay in the go to Beit HaMikdash and the Simchat Beit HaShoevain. Maybe they had like their own like men bonding over cigars and scotch and whatever, and the women used to hang together also and like had like a day of mani pedi. What do I know? Maybe they had like a good time together and there was like like a whole group of friends, and therefore it was important for her to go and meet all of her friends, in person, not as a as a WhatsApp video call. Okay, let's continue. What I want to do at this point, because this is pretty much all the information that we got about Jonah's wife, I want to go into something that really interests me. I want to dissect a little bit that statement from the Talmud. And I want to delve with you guys into that statement from the Talmud and see if we can gain something about that. Okay? So you remember, the statement from the Talmud said the following. ואשתו של יונה הייתה עולה לרגל ולא מיחו בה חכמים. Right? She used to do aliyah לרגל and the rabbis did not protest. Fine. Here's the full statement. It comes from Eruvin, Tzadi Vav, and here is the full statement. Michal bat Kushi, we're going to talk about her in a second. Michal, the daughter of Kushi, hayta manachat tefillin. She used to put on tefillin. Velo michu b'chachamim, and the rabbis did not protest. Similarly, here is our statement. V'ishto shel Yonah, Jonah's wife, hayta ola laregel velo michu b'chachamim. Right, and Yonah's wife also did something, was I guess against the norm, at least, going into Yerushalayim. Maybe it was dangerous. Maybe she just wanted to meet her friends. Maybe she just wanted to be with her husband. Doesn't matter. And the rabbis did not protest against that, even though she had no obligation. Now, here's the Gemara continues. The fact that the rabbis did not protest. Alma kasavre, perhaps they hold, the rabbis think, mitzvat aseh shelo azman gerama. Meaning that perhaps those mitzvot, i.e. tefillin and aliyah laregel, are not that type of mitzvot that are bound by time. I.e. there's a mitzvah that the performance of the mitzvah is mandated at all times. And therefore, women are obligated in these mitzvot, just like all other positive mitzvot that are not bound by time. Okay? Everybody's familiar with that concept, right? We have mitzvot that we say mitzvot shehazman grama, meaning mitzvot, commandments that are bound by time. Nashim pturot, women are exempt from those mitzvot. Why? Because they are busy. They're dealing with the kids and all that kind of stuff and whatever, and they have like hectic schedule and they can't have the proper mindset to perform that mitzvah at a specific time, and therefore they're exempt from that. Two examples that we talk about here are tefillin, right? We say since there's a specific time to put on tefillin, so therefore women are exempt from that. Same goes for aliyah laregel, because there's a specific time for that. It's only Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. And since, they might be unavailable those times. Maybe she just had a baby. Maybe she's taking care of a sick child, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. And therefore, they are not obligated in those mitzvot. Okay? Now the Gemara is going to continue, is going to reject it. And says, Vedilma, and perhaps Sabar le ke Rabbi Yossi. Perhaps this goes according to the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. The Amar Nashim somchot reshut. It is optional for women to place their hands on the head of the korban before it's slaughtered. Okay, let me explain here something before it becomes complicated. When it comes to a korban, the Torah says the following: "V'samach yado al rosh ha'olah v'nirtza lo lechaper alav." I.e., anyone who brings a korban, he shall lay his hands upon the head of the offering. Okay, and that's what happened. Okay, so part of the process of bringing korban is you place your hands on the head of the animal. Okay, and I'm not going to get into that because we're not discussing korbanot so much, but there's some sort of a process that without what we call smichat be'alim, without the fact that the owner places his hands on the animal, the korban itself is not going to be valid, even if it was slaughtered in the right place, in the right manner, and all that kind of stuff. It's not going to make any difference. So what does Rabbi Yossi say? Rabbi Yossi said, women are not obligated also in smichat korban to place their hands on the korban. However, if they want to do that, they may. If they wish to do it, they can do it. So he says, similarly, women may perform other mitzvot that they have no obligation to fulfill. Okay? So, the first understanding of the Gemara is they're not obligated because it's a town-bound mitzvah, and therefore, we don't understand that. Unless we're going to say that tefillin and aliyah laregel is a mitzvah that is not bound in time. So the Gemara says, no. Maybe there's a different explanation. What's the explanation is? We do recognize that even if women are not obligated in certain mitzvot, they definitely have the right to perform them if they want to. Okay? Fine. Let's delve even further into this. What's the context? So this statement that we talked about from Masechet Eruvin discusses, that's the Gemara, that discusses a Mishnah, right? The Gemara always discusses a certain Mishnah. So what is the Mishnah that this Gemara discusses? Let's go back to the Mishnah. This is the first Mishnah in the 10th chapter in Masechet Eruvin, and the Mishnah says the following: Hamotzet tefillin, one who finds tefillin outside, meaning outside the city, on Shabbat. What's the problem? The problem is that those tefillin are in danger of becoming lost or damaged. Now, tefillin are muktzeh. We are not supposed to touch tefillin on Shabbat. But I'm walking around and I see a pair of tefillin that if I'm not going to take care of it, even though it's Shabbat, if I'm not going to take care of those tefillin, I'm going to bring them home or something like that, they're going to get lost, or an animal is going to ruin them, or whatever, that kind of stuff, or they're going to be damaged, right? So the Mishnah says the following: what? Bring them, machnisan zug zug. So even though it's Shabbat, you need to bring them into his house, pair by pair. How do you do that? By wearing them in the regular manner. So, since tefillin has a specific way in which we wear them, and I can't just take them because this is going to be violating the laws of hotza'ah, i.e., I can't carry things on Shabbat in the public domain. Today we're dealing with that by having an eruv, but this is in the times where they didn't have, and therefore, yes, tefillin are muktzah. Yes, I'm not supposed to wear them on Shabbat. However, if I'm not going to do that, they're going to get lost or damaged, and therefore I need to take them in. But if I'm going just to hold them, I'm going to violate another prohibition. What is that prohibition? Is of hotzah, of carrying on Shabbat. Therefore, the Mishnah says I need to wear them, to put on tefillin in the regular manner, and by wearing it, I'm not carrying it, and at least I'm taking care of that issue. So I'm not violating that prohibition. I'm not creating another prohibition, but I'm able to take them in order to protect them. Rabban Gamliel Omer, Shnaim, Shnaim. Rabban Gamliel says he brings them, you need to bring them 2 pairs by 2 pairs. What is the story here? If you do 2 pairs, it's create a shinui. It's not the regular way. So on one hand, technically, you're still wearing them and you're dealing with the prohibition of hotza'ah, of carrying. However, on the other hand, it's not in the regular manner. Nobody puts on 2 tefillin at the same time. And therefore, you're not really wearing tefillin on Shabbat in the regular way. In what case? So what is it that we're talking about? The Gemara trying to focus. Okay, and what exactly we're talking about? So the Mishnah, the Mishnah says, with regards to Bamet Varim Amurim, what we're talking about? Beyeshanot. It's only a tefillin, old tefillin, meaning a tefillin that have already been used and are designated for the mitzvah of tefillin. However, aval b'chadashot patur, if we're talking about a case of new tefillin, unused tefillin, then I'm exempt from performing the task. Why is that? Because those tefillin are not defined as tefillin yet. Only by using it at least once for the purpose of mitzvah of tefillin, I designated them as tefillin. And up until I've done that, it's not designated for the mitzvah of tefillin yet, not fully. And the commentators actually bring other explanations, and they say, could use some sort of amulets. People used to wear amulets, and maybe they use the parshiot, the text, the parchment inside the tefillin or the tefillin itself as an amulet, not for the purpose of fulfilling the mitzvah of tefillin. And therefore, if it's not tefillin, you don't have this right or obligation to bring them inside the city, into your home, to protect them, because it's not tefillin fully yet. Okay? So now, the Talmud is trying to deal, what exactly is the machloket, the debate between the first opinion and Rabban Gamliel. One of the proposal is that the machloket is on the question whether Shabbat is a time of tefillin. Meaning, am I obligated to put on tefillin on Shabbat as well or not? Now, let's move on into our statement. This. Michal bat Kushi hayta manachat tefillin. Michal, according to the commentators, who is that? That's Michal, the daughter of Shaul. We spoke about her at length in the past. How did the rabbi derive that? Because of 2 different psukim. They combined 2 different psukim, and this is how they learned that. So the first pasuk says the following: Vayahan Shaul vayomer. Shaul said the following: Halo ben Yemini anochi. I am ben Yemini. Right? We call Shaul ben Hayemini. Shaul ben Yemini. Okay. So Shaul calls himself the son of Yemini. we have another pasuk says the following. Shigayon LeDavid asher shar Lashem. Okay, David wrote it's part of Tehillim, a psalm to God. Al divrei Kush ben Yemini, based on the words of Kush ben Yemini. So we know that, so King David says to us that what? Kush is the son of Yemini. Shaul says, I am the son of Yemini. Well, if you put 2 and 2 together, that means what? That Shaul is Kush. Okay? So this is how the rabbis learned that Michal, and we know that Shaul had a daughter named Michal, King Saul, Shaul, had a daughter Michal. So we know, so this is how the rabbis derived that Michal bat Kushi, this lady, is the daughter of Shaul. Now, Michal, the biblical Michal, is a tragic character. We learned about her. She is a princess that was given as a reward, kind of b'di'evet, kind of as an afterthought, to King David. Remember that story? What happened? Right? Goliath, mighty Goliath, the big Goliath. Nobody wanted to fight him, right? Except for this little dude said, I will do that, but I want your daughter. Actually, Shaul decided. Shaul said already, I'll give my daughter to the person who is willing to fight Goliath. Who was that little pisher? It was King David. It was not king at the time, but right. This is how he started climbing up the ladder. Okay, so she was a tragic character because she was giving as a reward to David. She loved him. We talked about that in the past, that she is actually, Michal is the only woman in the Bible that is described that she loved a man who was not her child. So she was active. Usually the women were loved in a passive way, right, by the men. But she's the only one. Umichal ohevet et David, the pasuk said. She loves David, right? She risked her life in order to save his, right? She helped him run away from Shaul when her father wanted to kill David, and she helped David run away. And she was deserted by him, by David, and ended up her life without any children. Pretty tragic character. What about the wife of Jonah? As we said, she's not mentioned in the Bible at all. She's mentioned in the Talmud. As we said, the Aliyah LaRegel, the pilgrimage, is a mitzvah on the men only. As we learned, shalosh pa'amim bashana, 3 times a year, yera'eh kol zechurcha, all the males are obligated. And in a similar way, the mitzvah of tefillin is considered to be a mitzvah of men only, right? Here's the Yerushalmi. Here's the statement from the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi explained that very clearly. V'limadetem otam et benechem, on that pasuk, the famous pasuk from the Shema, right? And you shall teach them, meaning those laws, et benechem, your sons. And the Talmud Yerushalmi says, Velo benotechem. The obligation is on sons, not daughters. And the Yerushalmi continues, Hachayav betorah, chayav betfilin. Those who are obligated in Talmud Torah, in learning Torah, are obligated also in tefillin. Nashin she'in chayavot b'Torah. Women are not obligated in the study of Torah because the pasuk says v'limadetem otam et benechem, right? And the Yerushalmi says, what does that mean? It's not your children, it's benechem, sons specifically, v'lo bnotechem, no daughters. And therefore the Yerushalmi says, Nashim she'ein chayavot b'Torah, Women are not obligated in Talmud Torah. They're not obligated to learn Torah, and therefore, ein chayavot b'tfilin. They're not obligated in tefillin. That's the Yerushalmi. Okay? Now, so according to this, tefillin and Torah study go hand in hand together. Those who are obligated in one are obligated in the other one. Those who are exempt from the first is also exempt from the second. The Talmud, the Targum Yerushalmi, which is attributed to Yonatan ben Uziel, says on the pasuk says the following: Ki hem kli gever, meaning tefillin. This is the kli gever. This is what? The vessel, or so, or the something that belongs, or really what's like the definition, or of a kli gever, or something that is man, that belongs to man, or men do. Sha'asur leisha lilbosh, and women are not allowed to wear, i.e., tefillin. So tefillin are not only one mitzvah that perhaps bound in time or that kind of stuff forever, but rather that it's a symbol of the stuff that men do. Like if I'm going to say a dress, automatically in your mind, dress is associated with women and girls, not men. Men do not wear dresses. Well, they do, definitely in Los Angeles, definitely in the 21st century, but generally speaking, historically and generally speaking, men do not wear dresses. Okay, and by the same token, women do not wear tefillin. Okay, now, so what happens here? Both the wife of Jonah and Michal, they're performing a mitzvah that they're not obligated in, because it's only on male. And therefore what? They are kind of doing something outside of the realm, the religious realm that was defined for them. Make sense? If there's a mitzvah that is for men, and a woman does that, that means she's doing something that is unusual, something that is beyond, let's call it, the religious parameter in which she's supposed to be. I'm not getting into this idea whether she gets rewards, whether she is allowed to or not. Different discussion. I'm not getting into that. But she's definitely doing something that she's not obligated. Okay? And we see the statement from the Talmud, the Chachamim perhaps should have protested against that. They didn't, for the reasons that we stated. Now, let's remember that these two characters, both the wife of Jonah and Michal, as depicted in the Talmud, based on the wife of Jonah, or at least Jonah, where we find him in the Bible. Where we find Michal in the Bible. That's before the Talmud, way before the Talmud. So that means when the rabbis are going to now describe or characterize those women, they're going to do it based on how, or based on the information that the Bible kind of underline about these women, right? They can't make something out of nothing, the rabbis of the Talmud. It has to be based on something. So let's delve into that for a second. So we said about Michal, she was not an ordinary lady. First of all, she loved a man. The only one in the Bible who loved, the only woman in the Bible who loved a man. She didn't give birth to children, something that is kind of rare in the Bible, right? This is already creates some sort of an unusual woman. Well, if she's unusual, if she's not the norm, then okay. She also put tefillin. She does a lot of weird stuff. Maybe she's wearing pants, God forbid, right? Maybe she's doing all sorts of crazy stuff. Maybe she's driving a car, God forbid. She even like maybe vote on in the election. All sorts of like crazy stuff that we can put and attribute to Michal. So therefore, the fact that she put on tefillin, okay, it's one of those things that this unusual, unnormative lady is doing. Fine. Especially something that is considered to be something that is done by men, tefillin. Well, also, only men drive a car, right? Only men have the right to vote, right? Okay, so I understand where the rabbis are coming from, and they can, kind of like, it makes sense that Michal is that Michal because she's not doing the usual stuff anyway. She doesn't have children. She's, she decides who she wants to love. She's not like submissive to, whatever her dad is going to tell her to do. She's got character. She's got like her own opinion, right? What about the wife of Jonah? Well, we don't know anything about her. We don't even know that she existed from the Bible. So what do we do know? We do know about Jonah himself. So if we can create some sort of a narrative about Jonah, we're gonna do it about his wife, because when you marry somebody and you're stuck. It's kind of like, if he is a bad person, then that means you're a bad person. And if he's doing something wrong, that means you're gonna do something, that it's on you as well. Right? So what do we know about Jonah himself? He was a rebellion, right? He tried to run away from his nevuah, from his task. God is telling him, go to Nineveh and you need to give that prophecy. And what does he do? He runs away. I don't want to do it. Have you ever heard of a prophet like that? No. So he is a rebellious prophet, right? That means he rebels against norms. He rebels against what is expected. And if that is Jonah, then we can assume that that is true for his wife as well, according to Chazal perception, right? They knew this saying in Yiddish. There's a saying in Yiddish that says, when you sleep on the same pillow, you catch it. You become similar, right? You live with somebody, you become similar. You adopt some of the mindsets, you adopt some of the, the whatever. You become, as in Sefer Bereshit. What does God say about a union between a man and a woman? He says, they become one unit. Whatever that means, I don't want to go into that. That's kind of complicated. But it becomes one unit, right? You pay taxes as a household, right? One unit, not two individuals. Okay. Anyway, so if he's bad, then he's. So these two women represent something different, something that goes against the norm, something that is beyond the defined. Nonetheless, the Talmud says that what? The Chachamim did not stop them, these two. That means, even though those actions are odd, unacceptable, unnormative, some people might say wrong, whatever you want to call it, they're not prohibited. Because if they were prohibited, then the rabbi would say no. And as you remember, the statement from the Masechet Eruvin said, "Velo michu ba chachamim." Okay, that's our understanding from the Mishnah, the Gemara in Masechet Eruvin. The Talmud Yerushalmi has a different take on that a little bit. The Talmud Yerushalmi says the following here. Rabbi Chizkiya b'shem Rabbi Abahu, Ishto shel Yonah hishava, Michal bat Shaul michu b'chachamim. According to Rabbi Chizkiya in the Yerushalmi, he says, you think that the rabbis did not protest? What are you talking about? They protest, as we say in Hebrew, ba'abu abua. Really, they did, and they voiced their voices, and they did protest, and there's no way that the rabbis would let, or the Chachamim at that time would let Michal put on tefillin and the wife of Yonah to go to Yerushalayim when it's dangerous or whatever this story was. Okay? Now, I want to go back to our Gemara, right? And the Gemara said here, מדלא מיחו בחכמים, עלמא כסברי מצוות עשה שלא הזמן גרמה היא. Meaning, from the fact that the rabbis did not protest. It says that's the psak, that's the ruling, meaning there's no prohibition on what they did. And at this point, the Gemara is trying to understand what is it based for. So the first option, as we explain, is that tefillin are not mitzvah shazman grama, meaning it's not bound in a certain restrictions of time, and therefore women are obligated. Right? And the Mishnah says the following. Kol mitzvot aseh shazman grama, anashim chayavim, anashim pturot. Meaning, but women are exempt from those type of mitzvot. So the fact that the rabbis did not protest against them, that means that perhaps those mitzvot are not bound in time. As we know, in reality, this is not a 100% rule. Why? Because we do have a lot of mitzvot in which women are obligated, even though they are bound in time. For example, Shabbat. Shabbat comes every 7 days. It's not all the time. Women are obligated in everything that has to do with Shabbat. All the prohibitions, all the mitzvot of Shabbat, and therefore, so it's not exactly 100%. What about Korban Pesach? Right, the Paschal lamb or the sacrifice of Pesach. Women are obligated, or back then in the time of Beit HaMikdash, to eat like everybody else from Korban Pesach, and they're obligated to be part of that Korban Pesach, even though it is a specific time of the year. It's only on the 14th of Nisan. And we were all, so it's not 100%. Or sitting in the sukkah. Well, that's a little bit different. Okay, but nonetheless, even though it's not 100% rule, in our terminology, that's the statement, meaning if indeed it's bound in time, women are exempt from that, etc. So that means if tefillin is not bound in specific time, therefore women should be obligated, and therefore we understand why the Chachamim did not protest against Michal. To prove that, the Talmud brings a braita. I'm going to do this. The braita says the following: Rabbi Chizkiya b'shem Rabbi Abahu, right? Back to the story of the tefillin that we find outside of the tchum, outside in the field, and I need to bring them into my home on Shabbat. Rabbi Chizkiya b'shem Rabbi Abahu. Rabbi Chizkiya says the following: Ishto shel Yonah Yeah. Where is that? Hold on. Is it in the previous page? Oh, I apologize. I didn't put it here from some reason. I'm sorry. The Braita says the following, that Echad ha'ish ve'echad ha'isha, both women and men are obligated. Echad chadashot ve'echad yeshanot, both when it comes to old as well as new, unused tefillin. Rabbi Yehuda oser b'chadashot u'matir b'yeshanot. However, Rabbi Yehuda makes that distinction between unused and used tefillin. So the Talmud says that the Braita talks about a machloket, whether I can bring the tefillin into the city, whether they're new or old or whatever. However, there's no machloket, there's no debate that women are also obligated to do the same thing. And how do we learned already, how do we take the tefillin into the city? You wear them. So there's no obligation on the women to put the tefillin if they need to save them on Shabbat. So that means from this, the Talmud says that what? That the women are indeed obligated in tefillin. And if that's the case, the tefillin is not an obligated, it's not a mitzvah that is bound in time. Now the Talmud is going to say, what? What are you talking about? Even if this is not the reason that the Chachamim did not protest against Michal, why didn't they protest against the wife of Jonah? Because Aliyah L'Regel is definitely a mitzvah that is bound in a certain time. So what did we say? The Dilma, I'm just going to go back to this statement here. The Dilma savar le כרבי יוסי דאמר נשים סומכות רשות. What is the second option that the Talmud suggests here for the fact that the rabbis did not protest? Is that there are mitzvot in which nashim are exempt from. However, they have the reshut, they have the option to do it. What is one example that we talked about and the Mishnah says is the smicha, putting your hand on the head of the sacrifice. Right? So here, oh, I did have it here. the statement from the Tosefta, I forgot. Okay. So as we said, the pasuk says, "V'samach yado al rosh ha'olav v'nirtzah lo lechaper alav," i.e., a precondition for the acceptance of the korban is the fact that you put your hands on the animal. And what the statement here in Masechet Chagiga says the following about that: Bnei Yisrael somchin, then Bnot Yisrael somchot. I.e., the men do that, but not the women. Amar Rabbi Yosei, Sachli Abba Elazar. However, Rabbi Yosei say, I heard the following. One time we had a sacrifice, we had a korban. And we brought this korban to the women's section. Vesamchu alav nashim, and the women performed the tzmicha on it. Whoa. The statement here, men do it, women don't do it. Here is a testimony that it was brought to the women's section and the women did that. What's the explanation? Not because the women are obligated to do that. They did it. Why? But rather, it gets them nachat ruach. It makes them happy. They want to perform that mitzvah. Therefore, they're not obligated to do that. But if they want to do it, as we say, Go gesandte hate. Do it. Why not? If it makes you happy, go for it. So what do we learn from that? We learn from that we try to understand whether there's an obligation. And if there's an obligation, what is it's under what definition? And if so, we can say that perhaps the other explanation is that women are allowed, or not even allowed, the fact that the Chachamim did not protest, that means they're allowed to do certain mitzvot, even they're not obligated, because it makes them happy. Now you're going to ask me a very dangerous question for somebody who works in an Orthodox shul, and you're going to say, is there a permit? Can women put on tefillin or not? Right? That's what you're going to say. That's what you're going to ask me. So here's what I'm going to say. I'm not going to go into that discussion because this is a minefield. But I'm going to show you the next slide. Shulchan Aruch. So to make a long story short, Rabbi Yosef Karo paskin in the Shulchan Aruch the following: Nashim va'avadim pturim mitfilin mipnei shehu mitzvat aseh shazman grama. Women are exempt from tefillin because it is a time-bound mitzvah. And if you think, because the Shulchan Aruch is only for Sfar, it's not only, but it's the main psika for the Sfaradim, then here comes the Agaha of the Rama, which codified also for the Ashkenazim, and says the following, and takes it even to the next level, Ve'im anashim rotzim la'achmir. And even in the case where women wants to be more machmir and take upon themselves to put on tefillin, mochin beyadan, you should protest against that. And this is why I put this picture, because obviously these are women putting on tefillin, but the protest, at least is here. The policewoman is here. Same goes, by the way. I thought it was cool because we talked about the Jonah's wife going into Aliyah L'Regel. Here's a group of women that are in Har HaBayit. This is a recent picture, as you can see. Everybody is wearing a face covering. So, by the way, this statement from the Shulchan Aruch and the Rama, the fact that it doesn't say that they are not obligated, or that they may not do that, but rather he said women are patur, women are exempt from tefillin. And then the Agaha, the Rama says, and if they want to do that, mochin beyada, meaning you should protest against that. The liberal movements took that as, okay, I hear your protest, I still want to do that, and therefore I am allowed to do that. And therefore women, both in the conservative and reform movement, put on tefillin. Not everybody, but vast majority. And the fact that the Shulchan Aruch did not say that they're not allowed to do so, but rather they're not obligated, it was enough of a wiggle room for liberal rabbis to come and say, well, you know what? They can do it. Okay, this is not our topic. I just wanted to put it in some sort of closure. Last thing that I want to do is I want to share with you something really moving, I think at least. There was a book, there is a book that is called Tchinat Hanashim Leveit HaMikdash, The Plea of Women for the Temple, was written by Dr. Yael Levin. Not Levy. Why did I write Levy here? I made a mistake. It's Levin, not Levy, whatever. And it was published in 1996. So it's a very recent poem. It's written. It's a work written in the style of a midrash, and in that work, different characters of women, both in the Bible and post-biblical ones, till the time of the Second Temple. They come, so to say, though they're presented in that poem, and based on their merits and their connection to Beit HaMikdash, to the temple, they demand or ask for the rebuild of Beit HaMikdash. And this poem, this work is based on the Talmud, the Midrashim, the Aggadot, the Zohar, and creates and highlights that connection between those particular women and Beit HaMikdash. Really fascinating work. Right after it was published in 1996, they sent a bunch of copies to different rabbis, among them the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv at the time, Harav Chaim David Halevi, was the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv at the time, and he asked the following question: whether one is allowed to read that poem on Tisha B'Av. Obviously, it makes sense because we're talking about the destruction of Beit HaMikdash, which is what we mourn on Tisha B'Av, and you know, these are kind of, so to say, this like it's a midrash of like, what are the words of those characters, those, you know, about, you know, for Beit HaMikdash. And he said, of course, it is permissible to read that tchina, that plea on Tisha B'Av, except for the last paragraph, because the last paragraph has consolation. And on the eve of Tisha B'Av, we don't read anything that has consolation, which was interesting comment that he made. But since it was published, it's being used in several communities around the world. I think it's a growing trend. And as I said, in this book, you find 18 characters, female characters, that prayed, plead, asked for God because of the merits, because of their merits, because of what they have done and sacrificed, etc., and their connection to the temple, and they ask for the rebuild of Beit HaMikdash. The characters are Sarah, Rebecca, Elisheva, Bat Aminadav, it's the wife of Aaron, Dvorah, Ruth, Hannah, Huldah, the prophet, Helene, the queen, and of course the wife of Jonah that we spoke. And like all these female characters had a connection to the temple or with the area on which the temple was later on built. And it's interesting that this poem deals with characters only till the end of the time of the Second Temple, which is, that was very deliberate because according to the author, this is the end of an era in terms of the connection of the Jewish people with the temple. Right? Once the Second Temple was destroyed, it's a new type of it's a new era. It's a new type of relationship between the Jews and the temple. And not only that, in the time from the moment of the destruction of the Second Temple, that was already the seed of the nechama, of the consolation, as we learned from the times of the words of the Nevi'im. So I just want to end with the couple of lines that deal with the wife of Jonah. יצאה נשמת אשת יונה כלת יועם וביקשה. The soul of Jonah's wife asked the following: אף על פי שלא הייתי מצווה, even though I was not commanded, I was exempt. עולה הייתי ברגלים למקדש. I used to go on the holidays to the temple. ולא מיחו בי חכמים. And the חכמים did not protest against my practice. ואתה, and you, i.e. God, שציווית לעמך ישראל, you made it an obligation to your people, הזכרים, the male, לעלות לרגל 3 פעמים בשנה. You commanded all Jewish males to go to Yerushalayim 3 times a year. האך יוכלו לקיים מאמרך. How could they fulfill your mitzvah, your commandment. How can they fulfill it? כשאין המקדש עומד על תילו, when the temple is destroyed. כשערבה כל שמחה וכשנשכח בציון מועד ושבת, when every simcha, with every joy, is not here, and in Zion, in Yerushalayim, they do not celebrate Moed v'Shabbat. Shabbat and holidays, obviously, we're talking about at the times that is before the modern rebuild of the state of Israel, obviously, where, thank God, today we do celebrate holidays and Shabbat in Yerushalayim. But this is obviously talking about the times of the Galut before we return to the city. So this is it about the wife of Jonah. I apologize, it was a little bit longer than usual. I hope everybody had a good time. You can unmute yourself at this point. And I'm just gonna stop the recording. If anyone has any questions, more than welcome to ask.
Did I miss her name? Did you tell us the name?
No.
No, because I do not have a name.
Oh, we'll have to give her a name then, right?
Yeah.